the mid to late 1800s, immigrants from many countries came to the northern mines looking for work. Among them were the Cousin Jacks, skilled hard rock miners from the tin mines of Cornwall, England. Their technical expertise and affinity for hard work were invaluable in the early development of the area's underground mines. Another migration took place during the Great Depression of the 1930s, when thousands came west to find a better life for themselves and their families. Many converged on Grass Valley, seeking the $5 and $6 a day jobs in the gold mines. Every day, the jobless would stand at the collar of the main shaft, each hoping the shift boss would select them for a job. Some wrestled for as long as 1 year before gaining employment. Working underground was very dangerous and required tremendous physical strength and endurance. In spite of these adversities, miners took great pride in their work, and today recall their experiences with dignity and humor. The Oral History Group of the Empire Mine State Historic Park is fortunate in that many of these men have shared their memories with us. Here then are their stories.
I'll have to start at the beginning, please, and you understand.
That's fine.
Now, my mother in Cornwall, England, was left with 5 children.
Yes.
My dad died when he was 32 of minor silicosis. At 14, I went in the tin mines in Cornwall, and I worked at the mine called South Crofton. I worked there a while until I was 17. And I told my mom I couldn't make enough money to help keep my brothers and sisters. My mother borrowed £12 so I could emigrate, and I went to Timmins, Ontario in Canada. And I worked in the Hollinger gold mine.
During the cold winter, Mr. Corrin learned of Grass Valley, California, the little capital of Cornwall. The opportunity to work in warmer climes lured him south by west.
I went to Detroit to visit an aunt down there, and there was no work there. It was in 29. And I hitchhiked all the way to Los Angeles. I got to Los Angeles, and there was a tramp steamer going to San Francisco. And I asked the captain there if I could work my way to San Francisco with him. He said, sure. So I helped swab the decks and do other jobs, peel potatoes and that, and I got to San Francisco. And there was no Bay Bridge at that time. So I got across the ferry, and I got into an open, and I run into a fella from Cornwall. And he told me how to get to Grass Valley. And I said, I ain't got no money, can I hitchhike up there? He said, I'll loan you $10, you can get up there for that. I says, okay, I'll send it back to your first paycheck. So I got into Grass Valley and I had 5 cents.
After spending his first night in a pear orchard, Mr. Corrin approached a fellow Cornishman.
And I walked up Ophir Street the next day, and on the corner there was a man there with a beautiful garden, vegetables. I said, nice garden you got. I said, yeah. He said, you Cousin Jack? I said, I sure am. Ah, I said, you're the one that slipped down there last night. We heard about a fellow sleeping down there. I said, that was me. I said, I come up here to look for a job. All I got is a nickel. He said, where are you from in Cornwall? I said, Red Roof. Well, he said, I'm from the next town, Camborne, 3 miles away. He said, come on, partner, you come in and have dinner with us. He said, we can't have a cousin Jack out like that. Well, I stayed with him, and he told me, he said, now you go to the line 3 times a day. He said, I'll have a word with the foreman. But 3 days later, a lot of men were, about 150 men looking for work. Foreman, Bill Rowe. And he said, you Bill Corn? I said, I am, sir. All right, take that to the doctor. I'll bring her back. I went down. Doctor said, how do you feel? I said, okay. Dr. Jones.
Yeah.
Will Jones. And it started in the Empire Mine.
In the North Star's vertical shaft, men and equipment were rapidly transported to and from the black depths in a cage connected to the main hoist.
The first trip down there is quite a thrill.
I think it would be.
Your ears plug up so bad you can't even hear. It's something. I don't know what it is, but boy, the first night you have a good headache, or I did anyway. And then as soon as you come up, different footage, your ears will pop, and then you're feeling good again.
The blast from the Empire's air whistle could be heard throughout Grass Valley at regular intervals. Clocks could be set by the familiar sound. Usually.
The town used to run by the whistle. The hoistman blew the whistle. And at 5:30 in the morning, you were down there and you used to look in the shop there. They had a clock there, and you keep looking in there and looking in there. And then at 5:30, you ran over to the whistle and you blasted it 3 times. That was for 5:30. Then you go back up to the hoist room and sit around and this and that, you know. And then at 6 o'clock, you get a 2 blast. Well, on the graveyard shift, sometimes there wasn't too much doing. You used to doze off, you know. I remember one morning I woke up there and it was about 5:45. Well, I hadn't blown the 5:30 whistle. So I ran down and I gave her 3-2. Didn't get up the hoist room very long, and up come Phil Keast, the boss, and he told me, he says, hey, Arn, he says, if you can't blow that 5:30 whistle, 5:30, he says, there's no use of blowing it at 5:45.
The Nevada County Narrow Gauge Railroad linked Grass Valley with the main transcontinental line at Colfax, a distance of about 16 miles by rail, 12 by wagon road.
Do you remember the narrow gauge railroad?
Sure.
Did you ever ride that?
Yes, I would. I did.
Yeah?
Yeah. They wouldn't let me ride it in. When I came to Colfax, early 1936, and I walked into Grass Valley.
Why was that?
They didn't want other people coming in working here. They wanted the jobs for their own people. But they let me ride it out. But I tried to ride it in, they kicked me off. They wouldn't let me in.
When the Empire was operating at full capacity, approximately 44 mules were employed underground. These intelligent and sometimes ornery animals quickly discovered some miners were easy targets for intimidation.
And the damn mule stands out there. When I got up close to him, he kind of like he's going to bite you. I figured I'd get the hell kicked out of me, you know, and so I climbed up in this cob. There's an old stove, and there was enough room to get on my knees. You know, you didn't want to be like a coward or nothing.
Disagreeable working conditions did not dull a miner's sense of humor, especially when someone else was the butt of the joke.
I've heard some wonderful stories about shoes being nailed and
Greenhorn learned not to ask the miner they couldn't get the light going or something. He'd put all the water to the carbide and strike it, and it'd shoot a flame out from here to the door, and then that would be all she wrote. And then they're used to hide each other's lunch buckets and stuff like that. Actually, I mean, unless you were out at the station, you never had too many guys around you, you know. I mean, like when I was back inside there was just the miner and I most of the time, you know.
A covered walkway bridged the Empire's mine yard between the manager's office and the stamp mill building. This enabled bosses to watch, unobserved, the activity below.
Well, you never knew who was up there in this catalog. But they make a mistake. They'd be smoking a cigar, or they'd be smoking a pipe, or they'd have shaving lotions. Something in there just changed down in our change room downstairs. They had a great big old pot-belly stove. Well, when I smelled somebody in up there, I would take and fill this stove up full of wood, kerosene in it, and light it, and then I would put a piece of metal into the stovepipe so it all came out around.
Many miners felt justified in supplementing their daily wage with high-grade gold found in the mine. The practice came to be known as high grading. As one miner said,
As to high grading, that was our favorite pastime.
Oh, I'd love to hear that story.
It was all small scale, you know. They got, the high grade bars gave us $22 an ounce, no questions asked. And of course, if you had unworked rock, they'd want to work it for you, but you didn't let them have it because they'd steal about half of it. Nobody trusted anyone.
But so you were able to take it right down to merchants and bars right in Grass Valley.
Most of the merchants in Grass Valley would buy high grade.
I'll tell you, there's a lot of stuff hidden underground. After the war, I've talked to fellas, and they said if you ever get down here and there, the old guys that had stuff stashed away in that, you know, they couldn't get back because they couldn't pass physicals and that, and to get back underground in that, a lot of, you know, and they'd hit you up, say, hey, if you ever get down here, you look in that cob pile and back through here and this and that, but I mean, it'd be like looking for a needle in a haystack unless you put it there yourself, you know.
I know that some of the men never even saw gold.
Maybe they saw gold that was such minute quantities that you might see a little speck of gold in the face someplace. Or in a piece of quartz rock or a little fine sliver of gold in there. There's never enough to fool around with. Many men worked in that mine and never saw the color of gold.
These two fellas, they shared a car together and they both worked, but one was day shift, one was night shift. And I got off of the man truck there at the collar and I see this one guy throw the bucket to the other guy. Man, when he caught it, just about knocked him down. So you know it's full of rock.
When I first started working underground, I was working with an old-timer. Of course, I was curious about it, and I asked him, what do you do when you find gold? Well, he says, son, I tell you what, I'll look at it, I'll pick it up, I'll throw it up in the air. If it stays up, it belongs to the company.
in spite of the many precautions taken, danger was ever present in the underground working environment.
They were going to put a chute in, and the miner tapped. That's the first thing you done when you went back after the blast. You tapped the hanging wall. If it rang, it was solid. If it had a flat sound, it was loose. And he barred all that down. We tapped it. And about that time, the ship boss come in. And of course, he sounded it. And he couldn't make up his mind, and we all stepped down in the drift. And all of a sudden, without a rattle or a sound, a rock about 8 feet long by 4 wide and 4 thick just comes down. And we'd all been under it 20 seconds before that.
And we were working on the 10,900. There was about 6 of us working back in there. We were on the day shift. And we came out at noon to have our lunch. And while we were eating, we heard the darndest bang back in there. We went back in there, and right where we were working, it was about several ton of rock came in.
We had a forest fire here one time. We were penned in. When was it? 1936, I guess. And what we did, if they wanted the men to come out of the mine, they put banana oil in their compressors. And the banana oil would go down to where they were drilling. They'd smell it, and the men would come out. So the smoke was coming down into the mine, see? and smoke was bad up on the surface. So I went and passed the word along, and I told them up the surface, I said, put that banana oil in there and get the men out. I took it on myself and got them out.
They had driven this drifting about 100 feet and had quit it, where they used to store the dynamite for the mine in there. This fella, he went in there and wham! All they found of him afterwards was a pair of rubber boots.
The Cornish brought centuries of colorful traditions to Grass Valley. One was the singing of beautiful Christmas carols by the men and boys. They were a joy to all who heard, but of special comfort to the aged and infirm.
And so always on this Sunday, which would be the one that they would sing prior to Christmas, they would always in the afternoon go up to Nevada City. It was called the county hospital, but a number of these old fellows would be up there, and so we would sing through the hallways there, and after that we would get in the cars, different private cars, and we would go to the homes of the shut-in ex-singers and miners. 8 or 9 cars would drive up, the fellows and the boys would get out, and we would sing in the yard, and the old fellows would come out and tears in their eyes.
Cornish wrestling was one of the more competitive traditions of the Cousin Jacks. Mr. Corin describes the rules of the contest.
What does jackets mean?
Well, the jacket's a big canvas coat, and it's got 3 ropes across it. And you wrestle and try to get your hand down on those ropes and flop them over the shoulder. Either a fall or not. He's got to hit 2 shoulders and 1 hip, or 2 hips and 1 shoulder.
Did you wrestle on mats or just the bare?
There was a canvas
Okay.
up in the ring.
Did you get paid good money for wrestling?
I had $50.
For one? For one?
Oh no, I had wrestled 3 men.
Oh, you wrestled 3 men,
Yeah,
and then
elimination.
were there rules about not kicking or
Oh yes.
was it just no holds barred?
Oh no. You had to wrestle a Cornish one.
Gentlemanly style,
Oh,
you
yes.
mean?
You wouldn't play no foul.
Okay.
Referees, they call them sticklers. They would watch.
Yeah.
They would watch you.
In the late 1940s, the Nevada County Sheriff had too few deputies to monitor all the shenanigans going on in the mountain communities. Such was the case in the little town of Washington.
Got up to the junction of Highway 20 and Washington. We've seen about 30 cars parked there. Men, women, and children. The cars loaded up with television and blankets, and we couldn't figure out what happened. So we stopped and asked them. They said, we got word last night that Lake Spalding was going to break and flood us out. We had to get to work. We got down the bridge and we gave her the gun and we made it across all right. What happened was somebody wanted to rob the town. So they passed this false story about the dam breaking and everybody took off. And they went down and robbed the town blind.
Mr. Ciccone worked at several mines, including the Gold Crown near Allegheny in Sierra County. While snowed in one winter, he composed this poem, Snow Miner.
I was up in Allegheny where the gold's supposed to grow. I didn't see much gold, but I saw a lot of snow. I was staying with a buddy. We were working in the mines. We didn't make much money, but we had some darn good times. We'd stop down at Casey's and get a case of beer, then get in my old car and go and kill a deer. A chick was a good cook. He'd cook us up a stew. We'd tell mining stories and eat and drink till 2. We were doing pretty good, but how were we to know? We'd wake up in the morning and find 12 feet of snow. The house was covered over and we couldn't get out the door, but this wouldn't have bothered us if it hadn't snowed some more. Oh, we didn't care how much it snowed. We weren't even thinking, but we had to get to Casey's if we were going to keep on drinking. So my partner says, we'll drive adrift in that darn deep snow, and we'll get down to Casey's or any place we want to go. But we started with the shovel, then we got a pick. But she wasn't getting softer, but harder every lick. So we started to drill and blast her twice a shift, sometimes 3 or 4. We couldn't make no footage. We were barely out the door. We just couldn't break her, partner. That's all that I can say. And we didn't get to Casey's till the 21st of May.
In the 1950s, the Brunswick, Empire, and other mines were shut down. It was no longer profitable to produce gold at the fixed government price.
The last 5 months, they gave me the job of superintendent. Right after I took over that job, I got a letter from Charlie Allen in San Francisco, and he said, Jack, he says, we're going to shut down all of the mining with the exception of on the 9 and 1100 where we were mining tungsten, and begin bringing out all of the equipment. And we were to let the mine start filling up with water at that point in time. So.
That was kind of a sad time then, wasn't it?
It was very sad.
It was sad indeed. Hard rock mining virtually ended in the northern mines of California. The miners were left with only memories of the good times and bad, the camaraderie, the friendship.
I've seen the time it felt good to get underground because it might be 10 degrees on top or something. You get down there and then you started living.
If there was mines were still running and I still needed a job, I'd still be working in them. There was a tough breed of men. They had to be.
Yes.
Yeah, they had to be.
I feel to this day, had they left things alone, I'd have probably been there yet. I like the mine. I like the activity under there. I like the people jollying around with one another.
It was a happier, freer time. People friendlier. Of course, we lived in a small town, which made a difference, and when you walked down the street, you knew almost everybody, you know, which made it a good thing.
You go to Johannesburg, you go to Australia, Malaya, Cousin Jack's there.
Yeah.
And the old saying is, if you're walking down a road and you see a big hole in the ground, you look down there and see your Cousin Jack and they're digging away.